Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Well Today and I'm your host, Khalid. But today, as usual, we're going to talk about two subjects. But these two subjects are going to be a bit diverse. We will talk about international relations, but in two different contexts. The first is, of course, the situation in Afghanistan and the frustration that the US government, especially the Trump government, has with the stalemate that is taking place in Afghanistan. And it is preparing to undertake a review of its strategy in Afghanistan. This is, of course, a year after President Donald Trump agreed to extend America's involvement in the 17-year-old war. You might remember that the US forces have been present in the Afghan region since a very long time, but they haven't been able to achieve some positive success, or how should I say, some real success in its war in Afghanistan. The Taliban are still holding control. The Taliban still hold a majority of Afghanistan. And lately, we've seen with the arrival of Mike Pompeo in Pakistan and also in Afghanistan, that the US wants Pakistan to get involved, that the US wants Pakistan to help Afghanistan in the peace process with the Taliban, and that the Afghan government is interested in these talks with the Taliban. Now, this is the first segment that we're going to talk about. Our second segment is on the trade war between the United States and China. Two big powers. Trade frictions are getting worse. There's a fresh round of tariffs. It's just not about trade, but it's about something more fundamental. A lot of economists are saying that it's not G7, it's not G20, it's G2 between the US and China. A lot of changes are happening. The FTSE indexes are changing. The FTSE 100 is down 100 points. The US is to, of course, add tariffs to $200 billion of Chinese imports. This is going to hurt global growth. That includes meat, vegetables, chemicals, and badger hair all would be hit. What will happen once these tariffs are imposed from September? Is this going to change the world scenario as far as trade is concerned, when these two countries will be at war? Trade war, let's put it that way, as far as the tariffs are being increased. To talk about these two important topics, we've been joined by two very important guests. Let me introduce them to you one by one. On my very right is Dr. Amina Mehmood. You are the head of international relations at the Islamic University and a frequent guest at our shows. Thank you very much, Dr. Amina, to have joined us. The second is our regular defense analyst, Brigadier Tipu Sultan Sahab. Tipu Sultan Sahab, it's a pleasure to have you here. We will continue our discussion on these two important topics, but after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Well Today. I'm your host, Khalid, and we are in conversation on two important international topics. The first is the US-Afghan relationship and the frustration of the US government, of the Trump government, with the stalemate in Afghanistan, that they are not seeing the future, a bright future as far as the Afghan-US relationship or the Afghan situation as they would like to have it is concerned. Let's begin with our first topic, and let's begin our discussion with Dr. Amina Mehmood. Dr. Saiba, we have seen the US presence in Afghanistan for the last 17 years. We have seen the war in Afghanistan. We have seen the post-war scenario. We know that the Taliban do not want the US forces to continue their stay in Afghanistan, despite that the US does not want the same thing, but at the same time wants talks with Afghanistan that we've seen lately with the arrival of Mike Pompeo, Alice Wells, and other US leaders in the region. What do you make of all of this? How optimistic are you?
I think it's not the right time to talk about optimism, because US policy is not centered around optimism. They are following their interest, and their interest are not the interest of Afghanistan, and they are not coinciding right now with the interest of Pakistan and the other countries in the region. And it is the frustration of Mr. Trump, because Mr. Trump is having the approach of just a businessman. He says that we have invested that much amount and we should get in return this thing. And you know, the things which are complicated, which are now in miserable shape for the last 17 years, and before that in decades of 70s and 80s, they have been maltreated or mistreated by the whole international community, including the US. They are not going to be refined within few days. And certainly Mr. Trump has to realize that, and he declared in last August that this would be the US policy, and we have to settle down these things within 1 year. And so I think that these things are not possible, because these things are beyond control of all NATO forces when they were having large number of troops stationed here. Even now they have withdrawn and they are adding more troops here, and they expect that everything would be in their control within few months. It is not possible, one thing. The other, that Taliban is a potent force in Afghanistan. They cannot be neglected. If you want to bring them on negotiation table, certainly there should be some incentive, there should be some leverage with the US government. They are not having that leverage right now. They are supporting Afghan government that is having only 50% of area under their control. The whole rural area and suburb of Kabul, even they are under the control of Taliban. So what is the logic for them to come to the negotiation table
unless they get something that is concrete in return?
Unless US offer them something concrete in return, and that would be again according to them in their interests, right? So I think that Mr. Trump should be quite patient about his policy. And in that policy, he has to create consensus in US Congress too, because Senate Finance Committee, Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, Senate Defense Committee, all are speaking against this policy of impatience showed by Mr. Trump, that he is going to review his policy, he is going to do this and that. In that context, he has to take into account the local stakeholders, the first Afghan government, and then Pakistan, of course. And then China and Russia are now the stakeholder in this region. So the frustration Mr. Trump is showing just his frustration, and that should not be the frustration of American government. Otherwise, things would be very complicated.
All right, Brigadier Tipu Sultan Saab, frustration is something that we are seeing from the American side, and it's quite evident in the statements that are emanating from the US government. Now, we have also seen Mike Pompeo's recent visit to Pakistan and Afghanistan, Alice Wells' recent visit to Pakistan and Afghanistan, and the review of the whole policy that the Trump government and the Trump administration wants to do as far as the Afghan policy of the US is concerned. Do you feel, in your point of view, sir, that this change in policy that they are hinting at or wanting is a realistic approach that they are going to, or is it just something, an extension, a stalemate, that they are just biding time until something happens, until the elections maybe? What is the basic scenario that they are looking into?
Well, the question really is that what options can be exercised in this strategic stalemate. It is a strategic stalemate for almost 2 decades. And it is very significant to note that the Americans and their allies came here to finish off Taliban. Yet after 2 decades, they are saying that it is very unfair that the Taliban do not want to talk to us. You know, But having said that, let me tell you that there are certain very significant factors that we must not forget.
All right.
Number one is I have a slight hope in the American ambassador over here, Mr. David Hale. He has got credentials.
The Trump administration
very
also has a
capable-
lot of, I should say, support or is hinging on David Hale as well. And even the next appointment of Mr. David Hale is going to be very important.
Yeah, you know, as compared to his predecessors, he basically understands that it is very important that the relations between India and Pakistan should normalize. I'll come to it a little
All right.
later, but
All right.
then he's been raised in his stature also as a third senior most US diplomat, serving outside the territorial limits of America. Here in Pakistan, they consider this embassy to be very important, if not the most important in the world. So, if Mr. Hale understands that, and then the CIA would tell him that it is very important to rein in India from what they are doing in Afghanistan. And I see over the past about 6 months or so, I see a faint hope and a change, a tacit change in understanding of the Afghan government as well as the American government. Although
Towards what?
although Mr. Trump had announced the South Asian policy and which was very belligerent, to which Pakistan reacted. And
It
after
was not
that,
an optimistic policy at all.
you know, it was not optimistic. Initially, what I said that it is important to consider what options do we have. I think if the Americans want to have any other option other than engaging all factions of Afghan population into the Afghan fold for peace and having to realize in a realistic manner what Pakistan has achieved or what Pakistan wants, and after having realistically analyzed that in South Asia, they have to if not permanently, temporarily move away from considering India as a pivotal state to solve the problem in South Asia. The Indians are not going to solve. They, you know, look,
But how is that going to happen? I don't see that happening.
You know, if it is not going to happen, then I am afraid peace is going to be elusive in Afghanistan.
All right.
It is as simple as that. You know, if the Indians could not put up with SARC, if the Indians could not behave in Shanghai
Cooperation
Corporation,
Organization, yes.
if the Indians could not behave in Asia Pacific, how do you expect them to behave in South Asia when they have declared that they want Pakistan to remain sucked into the Afghan conflict and not get this?
In other words, they want the Afghan conflict to continue and not end.
What I am trying to tell you is that when the Americans say that they are going to revise their strategy in South Asia, they should seriously consider and put what options do they have on the table. Recently, Alice Wells visited over here. There is an interim government over here, so she had to go to General Bajwa anyway, who comes, the US diplomats do go to the GHQ, and then they go to Kabul and all that. I think her recent visits to South Asia and the type of engagement that she has shown reflects on the one hand that there is an urgency in the American policy makers that they have to do something about this 18 or so years of war that they have been fighting in Afghanistan. They know for a fact that it is impossible for them to control Afghanistan to win and have install a Western side democracy in Afghanistan and say everything is honky and dory. We leave Kabul, when we go to Washington, everything is going to be fine. Well, if they leave Kabul and go to Washington, there will be a solution. I don't know whether they want to do that or not. But if they want to remain engaged, and if they want to remain engaged and be leaders of the world, then they have to realistically consider the strategy that has failed. You know, there are two principles of strategy. One is that you do not reinforce a failure. That is one principle of strategy. If the Americans want to reinforce the failure, They have been killing Baitullah Masood, Waliur Rahman, Makhtar Mansoor on the eve of talks, and here they are saying the Afghans not talking to us. The Pakistan should please get the Afghans.
They have
Pakistan is
jeopardized
saying,
talks in the past at so many intervals.
so many instances. So if you commit such a strategic blunder, then you do not, no matter how many good tactical things you know, it will not pay you. And that is the second principle of strategy, and that says that you cannot compensate a strategic blunder with tactical brilliance.
That's
That
a
is the
very
second.
good term.
You cannot compensate a strategic blunder with tactical brilliance. The Americans got to understand that they have to be strategically poised towards success. If they are not poised strategically towards success, then I am afraid they will be lost here and there, and they will not get to the solution. So what I want to suggest to Mr. David Hale is, as a friend of America and as a citizen of Pakistan, and as a person who has been affected by the Afghan war over 2 decades, the people have suffered, my armed forces, my country has suffered, its economy has suffered, my neighbor Afghanistan has suffered, and you know, it makes me very unhappy to know that the Americans do not have a correct strategy to solve the South Asian problem. So, you know, when you look at that, and if the Americans do understand now that they have to stop seeing the Afghan problem through the prism of Indians and what the Indians want to do to Pakistan, and if Mr. David Hale understands that there should be a relation improvement between India and Pakistan, well, then he should go and tell Delhi that they should behave and come on the negotiation tables and not try to destabilize Pakistan and withdraw $800 that they have promised, they have injected to destabilize Pakistan, create fifth columnist over here and kill people.
That is so true.
So
Now,
what I want to tell you, my friend, is that it's a very interesting situation. If the Americans want to reinforce the failure, if they want to be lost in the strategy that they have been adopting over here, well, it's very strange and it's very disappointing for me when the American think tanks and the Pentagon says that the core pillars of our policy in South Asia is not going to change. Well, if the core pillars of your South
Then
Asia
nothing
policy
else
is
is
not
going
going
to
to
change.
change, you will remain here for another 2 decades, and then there will be a debate in the American Senate and congressmen, and you know, there is a lobby in United States, even if the Republicans, their Senator Ryan says that they have to leave because all the perpetrators of terrorism on 9/11, which I am not sure whether it is a true thing or it is a self-inflicted casus belli thing for America to attack the other countries. I am not sure. There are so many things and theories about it. But if there is a lobby in the United States government and Senate, Pakistan should go and create a nexus, a carcass within the US government apparatus to tell them that enough is enough. Now realize what has been your strategic mistake, change it, and let's go for the best. And if in the hidden process you wanted to sort out Pakistan in certain manners, well, you've not been able to do that, and you will never be able to do that. And then coupled with that, the Chinese do not agree with you, the Russians do not agree with you, the world does not agree with you. Angela Merkel is fuming, annoyed when Donald Trump comes and says in NATO that Germany is a captive of Russia. Well,
and we're going to come to that because
you know what? I tell you, my friend, that there is a thought simmering in Europe that the Russians and the Western Europe should get together against the American belligerents. There is no communism in Moscow now. There is Putin over there. So some of the people think that what do they get by crossing the Atlantic and tolerating Mr. Trump's wild policies and having to suffer in their
but
economy.
Mr. Trump isn't
and
changing
being
his policy
threatened.
despite
So
what we might discuss here today. Is Mr. Trump really going to change his policy? Have we really seen a change? He might get frustrated over one policy or the other, whether it be China, whether it be Afghanistan, whether it be Pakistan, India. But will he really change his mindset?
No, a person as important as the American president and as powerful as the American president, you know, within the democratic setup on this planet, there is no democratically elected person who is as powerful as the US president, notwithstanding their armed forces and economy. According to their constitution, it is very difficult to impeach an American president, come what Monica Lewinsky or whatever.
Yes.
So, what I want to tell you is that there is a growing uneasiness in the American media and the Western capitals, and if Mr. Trump does not change, and if he perpetually wades with a trade war with China, with Russia, with Western Europe, the Americans are very worried. They are very worried. You know, the times have gone where you want to bully the nations. You know,
All right.
we are past this century.
Dr. Amina, the time has gone by when you can bully the nations, but at the same time, the US hasn't ended its policy to sort out Pakistan. With Brigadier Tipu Sultan said, it's a very good term, sorting out Pakistan. At the same time, he says you cannot counter strategic blunders with technical brilliance.
With tactical brilliance.
Tactical brilliance. Do you feel that change can occur in the current scenario, in the current global or regional scenario?
As far as Pakistan is concerned, change is, there would be no change in US policy. They are using Pakistan simultaneously.
But they have always used Pakistan, it's nothing new there.
And simultaneously they wanted to sort out Pakistan too, and Brigadiers have rightly referred that they want to give India a central role in South Asia, and that is not possible if they want to pursue peace at the same time.
The civil nuclear deal with India was just one of the different
They have done everything, but they are following two conflicting goals, peace and India. They are divorced from each other, you know. They are having no conformity because India is having conflict with almost all its neighbor nations, and now they are conducting their activities through Afghanistan. And he very rightly said that if they want to create Indian hegemony in this region through Afghanistan, and they are following this policy, certainly Pakistan is not going to compromise. I think US is following two contradictory goals. Mr. Trump promised during his election campaign that he will pull out from all the international commitments and disputes, and Afghanistan was one of them, and he promised with the European Union to do the same. And right now, and other day, he said that he will lessen his international commitment, having financial burden on US economy. And now he is demanding the same from European Union. He has started the trade dispute with the European Union too, and that is actually a bargaining chip, that if you have to resolve this, then you have to follow, or you have to bear your commitment towards NATO, and you have to add something, or you have to fulfill your share in that expeditions they are following all over the world. That is one thing. The other, that they want to keep their presence here to counter in China and Russia at the same time. So these conflicting goals are certainly creating some confusion in Mr. Trump's mind. He wanted to have this, and what I perceive that Americans are at this point on the same verge as they were in Vietnam decades before.
And you know what happened with the Vietnam
Yeah,
war.
they wanted to come out, but with respect. And same situation in Afghanistan, they wanted to come out with respect, having some sort of democracy, some sort of control of Afghan government, some sort of American government there, and that is having control over all over the Afghanistan, and that should not be prone to Chinese and Russian interests. They should be inclined to US, and then they should pull out. This is not possible right now. They have to pull out without grace. And if they want to have this grace, then they have to take all stakeholders, including Pakistan, on board.
But Dr. Amna, how can they pull out without or with grace when a former Afghan leader says that Afghanistan cannot survive even 6 months if the US pulls out of Afghanistan?
For that purpose, they have to offer the local stakeholders some leverage, some incentives. If they want to bring, as brigadiers have just mentioned, that you are killing them, you are destroying their homes, and then you say that they should be on negotiation table. They came a number of time and you proved distrustful, and as a superpower, as even a sovereign nation, you should fulfill your commitments. But American government is failed to do that. So there should be some proper agenda on which Taliban should come for negotiation table, and Americans have to compromise, because no negotiations ever are without bargaining. And Americans have to understand that they are not having that status of superpower that they can assert some sort of
But
dictation.
they still believe they are the sole superpower.
They are souls to superpower, but they are having confrontation all over the world. You see the China, you see the European Union, you see even a small tiny South Asia challenging US interests. Same is the case where you see in Far East, same is the case in Middle East, where American hegemony is still sustained. That was the period of 1950s, or at the most half of the 1960s. This is no more American century, and if Americans have to maintain their status of the superpower in terms of strategical partner, in terms of a military power, then they have to reconcile with their regional partners, and they have to understand that they have to take European Union on board. And if European Union would be on the side of Russia, certainly they would be on the side of China also, and then Americans would be isolated across the Atlantic only.
But this is not the only place where they are isolated. Let's come back to South Asia, and let's come back to David Hale. Now, you know that Mr. Trump has nominated David Hale to be the Under Secretary of State for Political Affairs. This is a very important post, which means that he sees that there's some kind of importance to Mr. David Hale, and he understands the region. Now, Brigadier Sahab has also said that David Hale wants peace between India and Pakistan. Now, all of these statements become very contradictory in the regional scenario when it comes to US-Pakistan, US-India, India-Pakistan, India-Afghanistan, Pakistan-Afghanistan relationship. Because how can you have peace when there are two forces, that is India and Pakistan, especially from the Indian side, who do not want peace in any form or any way in Pakistan, who want, as Brigadier Sahab also says and very rightly says, that they want Pakistan to continue seeing an Afghanistan that is not a peaceful Afghanistan. Now, when the US government is frustrated by the situation in Afghanistan, on the other hand, there is a total opposite line to it all when it comes to the regional scenario and the relationship that it has with the other powers in the region.
China,
India, Russia. I mean, what's going to happen? Is the US going to completely turn around and say, all right, we have understood our mistakes, what we've done in the past 2 decades, and we want to really now force our way for the betterment of the region? Or is it just a tactical ploy?
the last one is right, because this is the American strategy to have simultaneously they are following contradictory goals, and you, as you were referring to President Ambassador's statements, and I recall in my mind the statements of Robin Rothfield, if Brigadier Saab remember that, the same policy, and she was a very nice lady otherwise, and she believed that Pakistan should be served according to the services Pakistan rendered in the war against Soviet Union, and this is a time to reward Pakistan. And the same statements were coming, and then the opposite statements coming from the US State Department, and ironically there was nothing that happened at the end. So this is the American policy. Number of what we think that we are keeping our own domestic politics in mind, that one minister is saying something else, another is saying something else, and Prime Minister says that I don't know, they must have their own opinion, and so it is not the case in case of United States.
All right.
They have very wisely and very cleverly chalked out policy, and they have number of statements from number of dimensions showing that it is a conflict of.
But do they mean what they say, and do they say what they mean?
I think what they say, they mean it, and they are having all strategical launches to implement that policy. And if you see that the second, you just mentioned the topic that is US-China
Yes,
trade
the trade war, of course.
that is not the new one. But you see the
But
timings.
now they're imposing
you
it.
see the timings that they are imposing protective tariff not only Chinese good but at the same time on European goods.
Exactly.
Right? So that China cannot claim that this is a war against them. But this war is not new. This is started in 1980s. And in 2008, I remember there was a conference in Hawaii, and there were the proceedings were published. 7 scholars from US and 7 scholars from China. They were having presentation on the same topic, that this is a trade war and how it would be settled. The problem, the basis of trade war is that Americans, they have changed their production policy totally, and they shifted their production, consumer items especially to China and Far East other countries because of cheap infrastructure and other things. And now when they count trade from China, means the imports from China, they include 2 things. One, that is the products made by the Chinese companies.
Yes.
The other products made by the American companies on mainland China. They count that they are the products produced by China, so they are imports. But China is having different point of view. They say that these are the American companies taking all profits with them. They are making things especially to be sent to the mainland America. So they should not be counted in that. And that war, at tug of war on verbal level and international level, that is continued for 2-3 decades. But the point is that at this point, why Mr. Trump is raising that? Because he is frustrated from his Afghan failures, and he wanted to engage other nations at the same time in the same way, that we are not having only strategic goals, but we are concentrating on the economic and commercial policies too.
That is interesting. Brigadier Tipu Sultan Saab, economic goals, economic incentives, you know that money makes the world, turns the world around, makes the world go around. And now with the America First policy of Mr. Donald Trump, he wants all the products, he wants all the American companies to gain as much profit as possible from whichever means possible. And in this whole scenario, there is the biggest trade war that has begun with China, with the tariffs that have been imposed on the Chinese products. Now, this is going to take place from September. Do you feel that the US is going to lose this trade war in the long run? And if you do agree with that, why?
Well, there is a difference between running a corporate company and a country like United States politically. But 1 or 2 lines on the previous thing.
All right.
You know, the American ambassador over here is in a war zone, Mr. David Hale. And he is assisted by a very senior person who is the CIA chief over here. It's a very important embassy, and he has been raised in his stature. That means what? Normally what happens is that the ambassadors across the capitals of the world turn back to their foreign ministry and to their government for decision making. Well, it may still be the same over here, but the interpretation of this is that the US embassy over here is going to exercise a much more, so to say, a liberal and an advantageous position, an independent position compared to the other embassies.
All right.
So, if that be so, then I think normally the ambassadors will pass a statement and the country will do something else. If that be the case, I think it is advantageous for Pakistan to engage with this gentleman who wants to have peace in South Asia and try and make him understand and what it will take him to succeed. And he has created a network of people. He's been here since 2015, and I think
he's been quite active since
Pakistan should utilize him, and Pakistan should also utilize the support in the US Senate where they want to end this war. We can talk about it in a later program, but coming to the economics now, we know for a fact that 3 major portions of the world, so to say, China, Western Europe and Russia, they are not comfortable with Mr. Trump on what he wants to do and how does he want to respect and deal the other country's point of view. In politics, in modern politics, in this time of age and information and interwoven economy, you cannot drive another country like the British would sail from London in a sail without engine and come in a boat to Mughal Empire and dictate things through their East India Company and then go back and install their own government. It is not going to happen. It is not going to happen for two reasons. One, that we are into different times. Second, at the turn of the century, the Americans were something else, where Mr. Rumsfeld was saying that it depends how the countries of the world behave. These were his words. So it's no more there. And Mr. Trump wants to deal with Angela Merkel or Theresa May or the French.
But Brigadier Saab, speaking of Angela Merkel, she is now in talks with the Chinese leadership. Germany is inching closer to China in this whole trade war with the US.
I told you that there is a simmering political thought in Europe. Why don't the Chinese, the Russian and the Europeans combine against the United States? It is unthinkable.
And this is the beginning of what you just said.
It's a beginning of a new era.
Of a new nexus.
I'm afraid if Mr. Trump does not amend his ways and if the American political and establishment apparatus does not convince him or to alter his policy, the Americans will face increased isolation in the world. And the Chinese have said that if you want to have 10% tax on 10,000 items of Chinese manufacturing in America, the Chinese are going to respond. And the business community in America is saying that the prices are going to be raised and the life is going to be uncomfortable for the general public in United States. Remember, now here in Pakistan what happens is that before the Chinese goods starts to come, like their cars like Ford, the wood industry and the furniture industry and all that, the prices were soaring. When the Chinese flooding their market, our markets with their goods and the prices going down, the other people have to come to compete with them.
True.
So they are at sea in competing with the Chinese companies, and the Chinese companies are doing the same in the United States. If you increase the prices of Chinese goods in America, the normal American citizen is going to suffer. This is besides what is going to happen to the American government when they sit with the Chinese president or Putin or the European leaders. So what I think is that if Mr. Trump wants to have all the dollars, all the wealth collected from other nations and not listen to them in Washington, he is going to lose market. He is going to lose influence, he is going to lose his political prowess and he is going to lose what Americans stood for, freedom, fair play and all that after the Second World War.
All right.
He is no more there anymore.
So times have changed. It's a new century, as Dr. Amina said. Now, Dr. Amina, this whole scenario that is changing as we speak, as you've also pointed out along with the Brigadier Tipu Sultan, this trade war between the United States and China, which has now moved beyond a rhetoric that was used to be in the past, and it has gone into a live ammunition phase. We've got tariffs of $200 billion worth of Chinese goods that have been imposed. That is going to be take place, I think, starting from September. Do you feel Mr. Trump is being properly advised by people around him as far as trade in US and US interests is concerned?
Yeah, I think that as you mentioned that it is beyond rhetoric now, because US has imposed already that is protective tariff on some of the Chinese goods, and Chinese responded the same. It has been happening in the past. I remember some in 1996. There was such protective tariff on Japanese motorcycles imposed by President Bush, later President Clinton at that time, and it was for the security of motorcycle industry of the US. But this thing is beyond that, because number of items are included which are the consumer items, and certainly the basic standard of life is going to be down of ordinary Americans. When I was there in US, you know, Chinese shoes were available from $25 to $60. That was the range a good Chinese shoes can be taken, and American brands, they start from $150, and it is not possible for ordinary person to buy shoes on this price. So previously, when American government was doing so, then there was there used to be 30,000 letters from merchants, not from the people, that if you will impose such tariff, half of the Americans would be barefooted. So that would be that is going to be the same, because now the American standard of living has come down already as compared to that in 90s. So it would be detrimental for the US president too, because he has to go into election after 2 years now, and his vote bank is mostly consisted of the illiterate, downtrodden people. That would be detrimental as to in terms of elections for him as well. And if we think in terms of the purely the trade war, Americans are totally dependent for the consumer items now on China. Secondly, they are totally dependent on IT industry on China. So there would be no alternative, and the other alternative Americans are having available, that is the Far East. They are compatible in terms of
and
the
even
price.
China said that it's going to bring the dispute to the World Trade Organization. So I mean, there's no end to this dispute.
And they are both signatory to that. And 1998, that deal was signed between President Clinton and the Chinese counterpart. And under that, they cannot impose protective tariff on this major level. Only one or two industry can be used for that, and just for, and that too for a limited period, not for as Mr. Trump is going to. So what I perceive that is just a rhetoric they are creating in terms of bringing China to the negotiation table and having certain accommodation for them, and it would be ultimately up to 50 items or 100 items, not to that large list as they are pretending
Dr. Amina,
right
we'll
now.
only see in the coming days on how this all plays out once China goes to the World Trade Organization. How is the World Trade Organization going to react? Is the US going to listen to the World Trade Organization as well? Only time will tell. Dr. Amina, we're short of time. Brigadier Tipu Sultan, thank you very much to both our guests.
I just want to say one thing, that right now what we can do is to watch Mr. Donald Trump and be amused. It's a very interesting time.
All right. Well, we can watch President Donald Trump and be amused, but at the same time, listen, observe on how his administration is going to go forward, because it is in hot waters, whether it be the Afghan situation, whether it be the trade wars with China going towards Europe, with a new nexus being formed between the China, Europe, Russia. How is it all going to play in the global scenario? Only time will tell. Omer, Khalid, but bids you farewell from this episode, the last episode of the week of World Today. We'll be inshallah back next Monday. Take care of yourselves. Allah Hafiz and have a great weekend.